Thank you very much, everyone, for coming and actually staying at this time. It's really rough to stay all day. And the topic is not also an easy one because not everyone is familiar with the Dmz World Peace Park that is proposed by the South Korean government. So we think that if we want to let other countries know about this project, we have to let these people know they are the Korean experts. So it might be the starting point of publicizing our policy toward North Korea and the peace in Korean Peninsula. That is why we brought these renowned scholars and experts as a panel for this session. And I would like everyone, each of you, to participate in the discussion after their presentation. So please pay your special attention to this session. And I know that you are already tired and it's a long day today, but it's going to be a very interesting session, I guess. And I'm going to ask Mr. Lee Kang-woo for his presentation about the Dmz World Peace Park by Korean government. Mr. Lee, 예, 하시면 되겠습니다.
예, 오늘 저는
Yes. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. It's my great honor to be able to speak in front of the audience. I'm going to talk about the background of the Peace Park. And also, I'm going to share with you the plans and the directions that the Korean government has in mind. And also would give you an update regarding where we are and what path we have been taking over the past couple of the course. Regarding the project per se, the Peace Park project per se, President Park Geun-hye, on her presidential visit to the U.S. in May this year, she made a speech in front of the U.S. Senate as well as Congress. And since then, the project has been progressing at a very steady pace. And first of all, let me share with you the reason as to why the Korean government is pursuing this project. First and foremost, if you take a look at the current situation of the demilitarized zone DMZ, it was set back in 1953, and this year marks the 60th anniversary of the setting of the DMZ. The original purpose of the zone was to demilitarize the zone, to leave it as a peaceful area. However, our situation today is quite the opposite of the original purpose. It's heavily armed and under the constant threat of the North Korean provocation. It's also the symbol of the conflicts between the North and South Korea. It's even posing a threat to the regional as well as global peace. And therefore, at this very critical juncture, it's important that we turn it into a park that is dedicated to peace. That's the original background of the project. Also, secondly, the birth of DMZ traces all the way back to the end of the Korean War. It came after the armistice agreement. The parties to the armistice discussions talked about the creation of the DMZ, and so we thought that it's important that those parties to the armistice talk need to come together again to enhance the cooperation, to establish peace on the region. Another aspect to the background, which is the third aspect, is that, as you're aware of, there have been a number of cooperation projects between North and South Korea, including Kumgangsan Tor project as well as Kaesang Industrial Complex. But as you're aware of, there are significant uncertainties about the behaviors of North Korea, and sometimes they just unilaterally declare the stopping or seize various projects. And so we believe that the trust has yet to be built between the inter-Korean cooperative projects. And therefore, through the DMZ project, we would like to engage the international community to work together which would in turn further solidify the foundation for sustainable cooperation between North and South Korea. And this will be also a way to prevent unilateral decisions that may potentially be taken by North Korea. Those are some of the backgrounds behind the Peace Park project. And for your reference, as you're aware of, the Korean constitutional law declares that the DMZ is a part of the Korean territory, but according to our armistice agreement, DMZ is subject to the military armistice or military armistice commission. So, in other words, under the jurisdiction of the Armistice Commission. And so the function of DMZ, actually the commission is now substituted by the high-level talks between the powers around the peninsula. But anyway, the area is still under the jurisdiction of the Armistice Committee. So that's the specificity around the DMZ, the governance around DMZ. Also, as you are aware of, we do not have, unfortunately, the map of Korea, but if you take a look at the location of the DMZ, it's located right in the middle of the Korean peninsula around the waist area, so to speak. There is a big band of DMZ that cuts across the Korean peninsula. And so the Eurasia as well as Northeast Asian area have to take great care of the DMZ. In other words, the passage through the DMZ would be a critical issue in order for us to pursue the peaceful activities across the region and the Eurasia. So those are some other specific characteristics surrounding the DMZ. And also, landmines are buried in the DMZ as well. And also, at the same time, as this area has not been habitated by people over the past 60 years, so ecological system of the DMZ is well preserved. And the peaceful use of the DMZ is not a sudden development. Even since the 1970s, the UNC, or the United Nations Command, made proposals to remove any remaining weaponry and landmines at the DMZ, and there have been a lot of proposals that have been raised since the 1970s. However, those proposals were not met actively by the responses of the North Koreans. And they even regarded those proposals as an attempt to make the division a permanent state on the peninsula. And they also said that the peaceful unification of Korea would address all the issues about the DMZ. And so, due to various reasons that I have mentioned earlier on, the peaceful activities around the DMZ have not been materialized over the years. And I think President Park Geun-hye's proposal is also in the same vein with the previous proposals. But what sets this initiative apart from the previous initiatives is the fact that, first of all, previous initiatives were quite broad and comprehensive in terms of the scopes of the projects. However, this particular initiative about the Peace Park is very specific, and it's a single project, specifies a single project. And it also reflects strong commitment and firm support of the government, with a strong focus on the implementation of the project. And let me now talk about the Korean government's plan to implement the DMZ Peace Park project. We would like to open certain sections of DMZ to turn it into a park area, and and would like to open it to people around the world, including people in the North and South Korea. It will ensure free passage and access for people around the world to disseminate the message of peace to global community, to turn it into a landmark for permanent peace. And let me specify the location of the Peace Park. But unfortunately, at this moment, we did not specify the location. We did not conclude or have a conclusion about the location. We need to continue to talk with the UNC and ultimately together with North Korea to make a final decision about the particular section that will be designated into a DMZ Peace Park. But we have some candidate sites through the site surveys, and but we have yet to reach a final conclusion. But one thing for sure is that it certainly would be located in some parts of the DMZ with a good size. We will take into account the environmental factors. And as this park has to be open to visitors from around the world, the site has to be well accessible, offering ready accessibility to people around the world, and should not involve the military considerations, and the eco factor has to be factored in as well. But at this moment, we do have yet to reach a final conclusion about the location. Once the park would be installed, I don't believe that there will be many buildings or constructions on the DMZ. Rather, the site would be in good harmony with the surrounding natural environment, with the installation of a minimum amount of symbolic sculptures or buildings. So those are basic direction for the implementation. Now, regarding funds, we do have the Inter-Korean Cooperation Fund, and the financing will come from and through the Cooperation Fund. Now, regarding who would take a leading role in the Peace Park project, would be contingent upon the agreement between North and South Korea. So the two Koreas will handle issues of military guarantees. And once the agreement would be made between North and South Korea, the UNC and North Korea, People's Army, will also need to reach an agreement about the designation of a specific section. And after the agreements are made between UNC and North Korean Army, the mines would be eliminated, construction will take place to turn those designated areas into a peace park. As the agreement between North and South Korea is one of the most important processes, the Korean government has been so far working hard on the international cooperation. President Park Geun-hye made an address in front of the Congress of the U.S. and met with the Premier of China. And by utilizing various diplomatic channels, China, the U.S., and other Armistice Party countries were contacted, and also the UN was one of the venues where we have been making our presentations as well. And so far, I would say that the project has been going on without a hitch, and I believe that as long as we can strike a agreement with the North Korea, the Peace Park project will soon see the fruitful results. So to conclude, the one remaining task is to reach an agreement with the North Korean party. And as you are aware of, the inter-Korean relationship at the moment is yet to see more trust to be built. And I believe that the two sides are keeping their close eyes on each other. But sooner or later, the contact will be made to North Korea so that the Peace Park project will start in a more earnest manner. That's the level of preparation that we're making at the moment. I hope that our participants for this forum today will support us, and your comments will help us a lot in making the Peace Park project very concrete.
감사합니다. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. He pointed out several points for the DMZ World Peace Park, and he pointed out that one of the reasons why South Korean government is pursuing this project is that because of the unpredictability of North Korea, the South and North Korean cooperation has been stopped by the unilateral move by the North Korea. So that is why Korean government wants to involve more countries in this project. And he also points out the legal issues that the DMZ area is, from our constitution, is our jurisdiction, but technically it's under the jurisdiction of the Military Armistice Commission. So this is the kind of issue that we have to solve to pursue this project. And he also mentioned that whereabouts of the DMZ World Peace Park has not been determined, and we have to cooperate with the UNC as well as North Korea for this matter, and we have to consider like environmental issues, accessibility, and other military or security related issues. And even though it's called a park, but he mentioned that we are not going to put many like artificial buildings and constructions. He said that we are going to put several figures there that can go along with the environment there. And the fund will be coming from the Inter-Korean Cooperation Fund. And one of the important things he mentioned is that the agreement between South and North Korea is crucial for pursuing this project. And this is the basic line for the DMZ World Peace Park by the Korean government. And we'd like to know how foreign experts perceive this project and how they assess and whether they have any other ideas, comment to develop this idea more fruitful for inter-Korean relations in the future and also the regional and global security matters. I'd like to ask Ambassador Everard for his comment on this. And again, I want to mention that the sitting order is just the alphabetical order for their last name, not their like seniority. Okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Asan Institute for inviting me today. Not least because you've had the kindness to invite me for every KGF. I think I may be the only speaker who's been here for all 4 KGFs, so I feel honored and I'm grateful for your generosity. But also because your invitation to speak on this panel today encouraged me to read carefully the documents relating to the Peace Park project. And to those who perhaps haven't had time to look in detail at the plans, this is a very ambitious project. Ambitious not just in the sense of the symbolism for world peace, of turning an area of barbed wire and mines into an area of intermingling of peoples, but also symbolic for the process of interaction between the 2 Koreas. And I think that if this plan can be realized, if we can establish a peace park anywhere along the existing DMZ, this will be a very strong signal that the 2 Koreas really have achieved a major move forward in their mutual links. But I, as my name card here says, I'm a former ambassador to North Korea, and I'm sure that the ministry, that Asan, haven't invited me along just so I can sit here and enthuse about this plan. Instead, let me try to share with you something of how I think the North Koreans might view it, and perhaps at the end a few thoughts on taking this forward. As we've just heard, an agreement between North and South Korea on this plan is a key first step forward. So I think the first question that we have to ask ourselves is, why would North Korea want the peace park? Let me now, having set out that headline question, try to look at it from the perspective of different groups within North Korea. Firstly, the military, who, as we all know, have a strong role in policy formation in the North. How are they going to see this? I think it's fairly easy to judge their reaction because we can study how they reacted when the idea of the Kaesong industrial zone was first put forward. That, of course, was some time ago, but I don't think the military position has shifted that much in the meantime. And you will remember that at the time they opposed Kaesong fiercely. They saw the whole zone as an imperialist plot, and they saw it crucially as a hole in their front line. It's important to remember that the North Korean military thinks in terms of almost like a Maginot Wall, an encircling fence protecting the sacred People's Republic, the sacred DPRK, against the external threat. And anything that punctures that line sends them into nervous spasms. The park, of course, from their point of view, would do exactly that. It would be a hole in the DMZ, it would be a hole in their line. And I think it would be very difficult to convince the North Korean military that the park is a good idea. How then might it be seen by the party? Well, the park has the prospect, let me see if I can quote accurately from the documents, it has the capacity to welcome people from both halves of the Korean Peninsula and the world at large, ensuring their free entry. That is a quote from the Ministry of Unification document on this. To be honest, I think the party also is going to be nervous. Remember that not long ago, if reports are accurate, 70 people were shot in different cities in North Korea because they had been indulging in such wicked activities as watching South Korean DVDs. Now, if a party takes that line on people that are watching DVDs, what line do we think they might take to actually allowing North and South Koreans to come to the park together and mingle? It's not too easy to think that they will be enthusiastic. There's another point here. Just recapitulating the quote, the park would ensure their free entry, ensure the free entry of people from both sides of the line. Is the park also going to ensure free exit? Because, yes, I can see some members of the audience are way ahead of me here. If it does ensure free exit, then large numbers of North Koreans are going to walk, or want to walk, into the park at one end and out of the park at the other, which, given that the North Korean authorities have spent a great deal of time and a lot of resources in closing off the border with China, they are unlikely to react to with enthusiasm. So I rather suspect that the major groupings in North Korea are, when they finally respond to this proposal, and as we've heard, they have not yet responded formally, but that they are not going to be overwhelmed with enthusiasm. And this leaves us with the difficult question, how then are we going to make this park a reality? Firstly, could I say I hope very much that there is no attempt simply to write the DPRK a check. I think that previous attempts to, shall we say, buy DPRK favors with money have led to the most unfortunate results, and I'm sure that we've learned from this sad history. But the DPRK is almost certainly going to see the park as yet another thing that the South wants from it, and for which it is going to want to exact a price. We've been hearing this morning about the complex of interactions between North and South, and a previous speaker sitting, I think, in this very chair, talked about possibly significant progress next year. I don't want to pry into things that are, as they say in the North, urimin just between the two Koreas, but if some kind of deal is in the offing between North and South, it may be that the Peace Park could become part of that. But I stress that the North is going to want a price for this. And of course, this will leave you in Seoul with the difficult and delicate question of prioritizing the Peace Park alongside the many other things that I know, you know, that you want the North to do. There are some quite difficult decisions ahead. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Everard. He points out several important things, that how does the decision-making element in North Korea would perceive this project, and also there are some technical issues like free exit, the existence of free exit. Then, if there is a free exit in this park, then North Korea would not be happy about it, right? And now I ask Professor Michishita Narushige for his comments.
네, 감사합니다. 천책연구 일본 천책연구대학원 대학에서 나온 미치시다입니다. 오늘은
From Japan. Today, I was able to hear details about the Peace Park project from Mr. Lee Kang-woo. I believe that the Peace Park project is very forward-looking and future-oriented, and something that we have to achieve in the near future. And so from that perspective, it's the fact that the current Park Geun-hye administration has taken the first step towards the peaceful park is a very encouraging achievement. And I believe that, allow me now please ask a couple of questions in order to further deepen my understanding about the park project. The first question is regarding the construction. I believe that this will necessitate a very large construction project. And so what's the size of the budget for the construction project? And also, what will be the duration of the construction project? So across how many years are you planning to construct the park? That's my first question. And secondly, basically, I believe that the Peace Park project is the one that will facilitate the exchanges between the two Koreas. But the initiative has been taken by the South Korean government. So that means that the local autonomies of Korea can be also benefited by the Peace Park project as well. And so, in that sense, as you're aware of, Korea has a plan to have the local government elections next year, and the development plans for the local governments will also become more clear next year. And so, what is where does the Peace Park project sits amidst the picture of local autonomy of South Korea? And as far as I understand, Paju, Cheoron, Poseong are some of the sites that are on the list of candidates. And some articles say that Cheoron is more promising than the other two cities. Well, of course, when the Peace Park project would be implemented, what order would it be, and what are the criteria that you're going to use in order to select one site out of the previous aforementioned candidates? And the next question is the so to speak, Mintongsan, or that would allow the passages of the civilian passage line. we will be sitting around because of the existence of the civilian passage restriction line, the communities around the line have been posed with a lot of constraints for their own development. So how are you going to address this issue? Next question is, once the Peace Park would be materialized or would become a reality, I believe that turning that Peace Park into an industrial complex like the one in Kaesang would be a very feasible idea. And I think personally it's a very feasible and workable idea to turn the Peace Park site into an industrial complex like Kaesang. But the problem is that it's still located on the northern side. In other words, Peace Park would be created and funded by the South Korean government, and labor will be sourced from the North Korean community. Well, that will lead to another problem, I guess, potentially. And that might be a factor that will undermine the inter-Korean relationship. But I don't believe that the possibility is very high, contrary to some concerns. So what's your view about this? And what are the stumbling blocks or the challenges that we have to overcome in this thinking process? Also, as Ambassador Everard has mentioned earlier on, you mentioned that North Korea would be also quite concerned about a park like this. And at the same time, I think this park would be also closely related to the security stance of South Korea as well. First and foremost, this could be a passage of the military passage, and this will be a loophole in the security stance across the DMZ. And these have been the criticisms raised against similar proposals over the past years. So what's your view about that as well? Well, of course, from the military perspectives, North Korean military threat against South Korea has been quite weakened over the years, I believe. But let's set that aside. But still, we need to focus on the potential undermining of the security stance around the DMZ with the existence of a park like this. And also, logistically speaking, I believe that you would like to select a site that is readily accessible, but the sites that will allow the easy logistics or access would be also a good site for the military aggression. And so what's your comment or view about this as well? And as Ambassador has mentioned earlier on, North Korean refugees or defectors may try to come to South Korea through this Peace Park. So are we ready to deal with all those potential issues? And now regarding the armistice and peace treaty, once we sign on a peace treaty, peace agreement, the legal order or judicial order around the around the Korean Peninsula would need to be changed, and that will specifically give rise to a couple of issues. First, Northern Limit Line (NLL) may have to be given up by South Korea, and the peaceful legal order. And those lines are usually drawn according to the international oceanic law. And so that would be another problem as well. But if we're not able to strike the peaceful treaty, maybe we could have a potential agreement or interim agreement, or we may interpret, or we may sign on a separate interim agreement with North Korea in order to overcome those judicial conflicts or judicial challenges.
Narushige, he ask questions about how big this project will be in terms of budget and how long it will take to accomplish this project. And since there is a local election next year, how this project of a DMZ World Peace Park can interact with the local development plan. And there's a report about the candidate areas for the World Peace Park, like Paju, Cheonan, and other areas. And what would be the considerations for choosing the exact spot for the DMZ World Peace Park? And related to that, he mentioned there were a trade-off between accessibility and the security considerations. And after finishing this project, then also pursuing this project, what might be the impact on the current civilian control line along the DMZ? And also there are issues, as that Ambassador Everard mentioned, that how we are going to deal with the North Korean de facto issues. And Mr. Lee Kang-woo mentioned that we might need a peace agreement between two Koreas to truly pursue this project. Then there are many other issues involved. That is why Professor Narushige mentioned that what we envision about the peace agreement between two Koreas and pursuing this project at the same time. Is it correct?
Well, the thing is, if you are to sign a peace agreement, you need to basically abandon the northern limit line because currently, legal environment on the Korean Peninsula is a wartime environment, but now it will be transformed into a peacetime environment in which international law will be applied in drawing lines. So you have to draw a new line, which is a little bit more advantageous.
So because of the scope of the topic of this session, I want to make sure with Mr. Lee Kang-woo that whether he really mentioned that we are really considering peace agreement to pursue this project.
Whether it takes a peace agreement to undertake this.
DMZ 월드 세계 평화 공헌을 위해서 남북 간에 꼭 평화 협정을 해야 된다는 말씀은 아닌 거죠.
그건 아니고요. 이것은 사실은 북한이 주장하는 것이 우리가 이제 그 한반도에 이 사업의 기본 목적이 한반도에 평화를 정착시켜 나가서 실현해 나가자 하는 데 있어서 북한이 과거로부터 쭉 해온 말이 평화협정부터 체결하면 이런 것은 당연히 비무장지대 문제는 해결이 되는데 그게 북한의 주장이라는 것이고 저희들이 그래서 이 세계 평화공헌은 사실은 평화협정 체결 문제와는 무관하고 그 북한이 주장하는 그 평화협정 체결은 남북 간의 정치 군사적인 신뢰가 아주 고도로 되었을 때나 가능한 것이고 우리는 이제 실질적으로 이러한 사업들을 가시적으로 해서 신뢰가 쌓이면 점진적으로 어떤 평화가 정착되어 나가는 그런 것을 주장하는 것이고요. 네. 평화협정 문제 북한이 주장하는 거예요.
So I'd like to make sure that the peace agreement is insisted by the North Korean government. So they basically said that we don't need this kind of DMZ World Peace Park if we have a peace agreement. So they want to just skip everything to the peace agreement, whereas South Korean government official position is that we can increase the cooperation and reconciliation with many other projects like this until we reach that point.
그래서 지금 전쟁 협정을 유지한 채 평화 공원은 만들 수 있다는 것입니까?
예. 정전 협정 틀 내에서 한 프로젝트를 추진하는 겁니다.
알겠습니다.
Thank you very much. And I'd like Mr. Scott Snyder for his comment.
Well, thank you, Jeong, and thank you to Mr. Lee for his briefing on the Peace Park concept. As far as I know, this really was not a formal part of the Park administration's developing policies until May, when President Park first mentioned the idea of a peace park in her address to the U.S. Congress. So it's really very timely to get a chance to hear more about how the government is thinking about this idea. And probably I'll overlap a little bit with some previous commentators, and I hope I don't steal any thunder from the others on the panel, but I really want to just focus on three questions, and I'm going to try to answer these questions. One is the DMZ Peace Park an idea whose time has come? Secondly, what is the significance of the Peace Park as a component of South Korea's policy toward the North? And the third question that I'm going to try to address, which has also been addressed by previous panelists, is, will the North Koreans accept the proposal? Is the DMZ Peace Park an idea whose time has come? Well, it's interesting because I've actually been watching this, concept of an environmental approach to the DMZ now for almost 20 years. The first time that I encountered it was in the mid-90s when a professor from Penn State came to see me to talk about something that he was establishing called the Dmz Forum. And that concept was very much focused on trying to keep the DMZ as an environmental preserve. And in fact, he and his colleagues worked very hard in the United States and with specialists here in Korea. And in fact, built an organization. I think they registered it with the United Nations. And they've really tried, especially through the early 2000s, to convince governments to, buy into this idea that when unification comes, the DMZ should be preserved. And in fact, I think that he even got some funding support from the Turner Foundation in the United States. In fact, they've taken trips to North Korea. So they've had conversations about the idea of, an environmental approach to the DMZ. It may not be exactly the same as this proposal, but I think it's interesting that in a way it builds on that, line of thinking. The other factor that I think is interesting to look at that has been a part of some of the conferences that the Dmz Forum has had periodically has been a look at the dividing line between the two Germanys. And in fact, that dividing line and the demilitarization of the dividing line between the two Germanys does feature green belts and parks, parkland that has been left unspoiled as part of the removal of the demarcation between the two Germanys. And so I just think it's interesting that that precedent exists. So the Peace Park is not a new idea. It is the first time that I'm aware of that a government has formally adopted the idea in any particular form. And so it's interesting that the idea seems to have gained traction in that way. We'll see whether, how things go moving forward. The second question is related to the significance of the Peace Park as a feature of the Park Geun-hye administration's inter-Korean policy. And really, as we all know, we've been talking about trust politique all day. I think the Peace Park is kind of embedded in this idea of trust politique. It provides a focal point for what I would describe as an approach to inter-Korean relations and really an approach to regional cooperation that focuses on functional cooperation and is step-by-step. I think one of the interesting things about the idea of putting forward this particular proposal is that, even though there have been other forms of inter-Korean cooperation, Kumgang, Kaesong, this could be a kind of fresh start or could be a kind of reset for the inter-Korean relationship, a way of starting new, given the fact that the other projects have faced some kinds of difficulties. And then I think that the way that the briefing couches this in the context of the UN command and thinking about the park as a symbol for addressing tension reduction is interesting. And I think it's interesting especially in the context of, if we go way back to the original framework for inter-Korean cooperation that was established in 1992, that was an agreement that talked about reconciliation, exchanges, and cooperation. And I think that the Sunshine Policy and the efforts at inter-Korean engagement from the 2000s, made progress on the economic and cultural elements that were named as part of that original basic agreement framework, but it didn't really make any substantive progress on the political security side or on confidence building or tension reduction. And so I think it's interesting to think about the Peace Park as an idea in the context of whether or not it might be possible to gain traction on addressing some of the inter-Korean political and security issues that would need to be addressed longer term as part of tension reduction, on the peninsula. It's worth thinking about that because if the Peace Park idea were to kind of be a proxy for building political and military trust, that would really be a significant contribution. I think it would be a heavy lift, but I think it's worth thinking about this particular project also in the context of testing to see whether it's possible to gain traction in that area. And then the last question, will North Korea accept the proposal? I have to admit, I also am skeptical about North Korean acceptance. I think one aspect that probably hurts the proposal is that actually President Park initially proposed it in Washington and then subsequently in other places. And then finally, I think in her Liberation Day speech last August, she kind of extended a public invitation to the North Koreans to join. But, that's may not, I mean, the Unification Ministry, I'm sure, knows best, but, that may not be the approach, the type of approach that has gained the most effective traction in the past in terms of moving things forward on the inter-Korean front. We know that with the downturn in inter-Korean relations recently and North Korea criticizing President Park by name, basically the North Koreans are giving, I think, a yellow light to Trustpolitik right now. But they haven't really talked about the Peace Park, so in that sense we can say that it's, to date untainted. The idea itself, I think, is really arguably non-threatening, whereas there are other aspects of policy toward North Korea that have more of a double-edged. And then, actually I think the fact that the park so far is, it's been developed, the proposal has been developed, but there's still a lot of ambiguity. And I think that theoretically can be used as a benefit in terms of trying to address North Korean concerns in potentially implementing the project. But I agree with Ambassador Everard that the biggest sticking point with North Korea for these types of proposals is always related to money. And the question of who's going to pay and how they're going to pay and what they're going to pay for. And I think that issue is probably going to be decisive in shaping North Korea's likely response. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Scott. He points out 3 points, and those 3 points are the concepts of DMZ, World Peace Park, is not new. There are many discussions about using DMZ as a symbol of peaceful cooperation between the Koreas. And one of the issue is that there have been discussion about using DMZ as an environmental preserve if unification comes. So how this new concept like DMZ World Peace Park can interact with the concepts like DMZ as an environmental preserve. And he asked question the meaning of the pursuing this project in our government's policy toward North Korea, and whether this kind of interaction in like cultural and like a soft issue area can actually lead to the tension reduction in Korean Peninsula and have some kind of spillover for like political issues. And he also is very skeptical whether North Korea will accept this idea. So maybe we need to have more discussion on the prospect of the discussion between two Koreas. And now I'd like to ask Professor Brendan Taylor for his comments.
Thanks very much, Dr. Wu, and if I could add to the thanks of other participants to the Asan Institute for what's been a really great day. I had three questions that I'd like to raise in relation to the World Peace Park proposal, and the first of those questions relates to the intention to internationalise the proposal as envisaged in the government document. Particularly the suggestion that in addition to the two Koreas, that the international community, including the United Nations and the US and China, etc., would join in partnership to implement the project. And I think in theory at least there are some good reasons for advocating that approach. Certainly it increases the potential for pressure to be levelled against North Korea to adhere to any commitments it makes. Certainly it also increases the prospects for generating increased financial support for the project. But having said that, I think if we do look over the last couple of decades and the history of diplomatic efforts on the Korean Peninsula, I think that there has been a tendency that the more players that have been involved, the more difficult and fraught implementation has tended to be. And I think the six-party talks experience does provide us a good example here, where at times there were disagreements amongst the parties as to whether a more hardline approach is more appropriate, a more moderate approach. At times we've seen the US and China cooperate. At other times their own strategic objectives have got in the way. At times, as we touched upon in the earlier session, Japan's domestic politics has also got in the way. So I do wonder whether the internationalisation of the project is. I would have that question about whether that's necessarily the best way to go. The second question I have, I think, builds upon Ambassador Everard's and Scott Snyder's comments about the economics and the finance of the proposal. Certainly, I'd be interested to find out a little bit more about what's intended in terms of the financial incentives for North Korea to participate in this particular project. As Ambassador Everard has said, the projects that North Korea has tended to sign on to, albeit in a very half-hearted way in the past, have been those projects where there has been a high degree of financial incentive for them to participate, like Kaesong and Kang, and even going back and looking at the agreed framework back in the early to mid 1990s. And there have been advocates of this proposal, like people such as Peter Hayes from the Nautilus Institute, who have suggested that, well, we could look at the example of the Yellowstone National Park in the US and the revenue that has raised up to $1 billion a year as a potential framework for this proposal. But I would be interested in hearing a little bit more about are there any plans in relation to that? Like, would there be a fee charge for the park in the same way as there is with Yellowstone, or does free entry literally mean free entry? There would be no fees. The last question I have relates to whether it is wise to try and enter a new agreement with North Korea at a time when it's becoming increasingly evident that North Korea can't really be trusted to adhere to any of the agreements it makes. And it's, as Scott has said, certainly this proposal isn't a new proposal. It's been similar ideas have been proposed since the mid-1990s. I think it's particularly interesting to look back to a reported instance in 2007 when a similar proposal was put to Kim Jong-il during the No administration, and Kim Jong-il at that time reportedly rebuffed the suggestion, saying it was premature to enter such an agreement. And I think if we look, while as Dave Kang said, there has been change within North Korea during the period since, I think we could also say that in terms of North Korea's strategic orientation and outlook appears to have changed very, very little during the period since, even with the leadership transition to Kim Jong-un during that period. And I think that the history of broken agreements during that period has led a number of commentators to suggest that North Korea really is intent on furthering its nuclear capabilities, its ballistic missile capabilities, and that therefore entering into any further agreements with it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I think that on the one hand, one could say, well, this is potentially a relatively low cost agreement. What's the harm of entering into another agreement? And I think that the harm potentially is that it reinforces that view at a time when there is an attempt to build trust and engage with North Korea. It does give further ammunition to those who are arguing for a more hardline approach. Just to finish off with a couple of observations, because I realise I've been relatively negative in response to the proposal, as have many of the panellists. But I would like to make two more very short optimistic observations. I think looking at this proposal purely from a South Korean perspective, I think the proposal does make a lot of sense. I think on the one hand, I think the initiative does serve, and the trust building initiative more broadly does serve as a way to quite effectively deflect criticism and negative attention and threatening behaviour from North Korea in relation to South Korea. I think it strikes a nice balance between the more moderate approach of the Sunshine Policy years, where it's interesting if we go back and look at that period, North Korea did tend to direct more attention towards Japan, towards the United States, in making some of its threatening statements, and less to South Korea. That's not necessarily a good outcome for the US or Japan, but if we look purely from a South Korean perspective, that's not necessarily such a bad thing. So from that perspective, the proposal is a useful one. And secondly, I think it also relates to that the issue of whether or not to engage with North Korea and how much to engage with North Korea. There is a vigorous debate about that, even, believe it or not, way back in distant Canberra, where I come from in Australia, there are advocates of engagement and advocates of those who suggest we shouldn't engage. But I suppose one of the concluding remarks I'd make in relation to this session and the day more generally is if we are looking at building trust, if we are looking at trying to change the policies of another country, certainly that is far more difficult to do if one isn't talking to that country. And so the proposal itself, at a relatively low cost, it does at least open up an additional channel for dialogue with the North, and in that respect, from South Korea's perspective, I think it could be seen as quite a useful one.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Taylor. That he also mentioned that issues regarding the internationalization of the park and other economic issues and financial issues, and the relationship between these projects with the policies toward North Korea, like trust building process. And he also points out that since it's now in developing phase of this idea that there are many hurdles that we have to get over, but there are some optimistic aspects that we can expect from this project. And it's always going to be very difficult to discuss on that chair, because every discussion's made all their comments, and he has to say something new. So now you are on the spot, Professor Zhu.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I really have nothing to say at all. So then, first of all, I have to say, initiation of the Peace Park is a wonderful idea. And it's also some sort of a new manifesto of the President Park Geun-hye's policy of North Korea. Chile is, we say, future-leaning. It's also getting the more constructive. All such characters could be, just always say, very vividly reflected from the concept of the Peace Corps. Because if we know the history, we know the North Korea's behavior pattern, then we will see how difficult for Seoul to move forward with this, some sort of very brilliant idea with, the North Korea usually will say it's hardest nut in the world. So my question is, Peace Park idea is a big, some sort of a cracker that we can just to keep the North Korea such a hard as the net, just to being smashed, as in open net. I'm quite doubts about this. I can't agree more with my colleagues in this session. If we're tracking down the North Korea's historical record, I think they are very notoriously, usually aspired for some sort of such an economic incentive. So without such an economic incentive, I don't think they will agree. So peace park idea could be some sort of attainable between the two Koreans. So then also back to the, my colleague's idea, who pays how much, I think money will be paid, and then what sort of such an incentive, the South Korean will really and seriously just offer in exchange of their some sort of growing flexibility in complying with this idea's enforcement. So I'm still very questioned about this feasibility, because President Park also very strongly emphasized South Korea will not just offer what the North Korea wants before Pyongyang could show its sincerity in denuclearization. So denuclearization is another, I think, the very important, I think, core point of the President Park's the policy of North Korea. Then if we just easily frivolicize, then we also say it's a trust building and the peace park initiation. So then it's another part of the current source policy. So how to keep such a two parts meeting at, and how with some sort of compliance we can easily and also very practically just figure out from such a policy. I don't think that'd be very easy. So even within some sort of policy framework, I see some sort of inherent tension with regard to the policy initiation of such parallels, denuclearization, and the trust building process. So then peace park idea is great, but I think it's also much constrained by some sort of inner tension in the current policy framework of the President Park Geun-hye administration. Forgive my honesty, I see probably from the beginning such a tension is always there. So then how such a tension, such a gap between the two, we say core points, I think it's hard to ease down. So then the question also will be back to, I think it's also a long-term question, usually lingered between the two Koreans. One is, for example, sunshine policy. They say we can take North Korea as a brotherhood. Then we should just offer them a very great incentive, help them get out of some sort of their domestic predicament. But I think the opposite argument is always being very strong and also well echoed. I mean, the engagement to North couldn't be unconditional or couldn't be some sort of unprincipled reconciliation to a very, we say, bad guys and it's dictators in the Pyongyang. So I have to say, in my views, such a tension about the initiation on, in other words, with the inauguration of Peace Park, came deeply from such a long-term, the arguments, even within the Korean's political system, and it's also a demonstration of its hard, deniable some sort of tension between the two policy and the emphasis. How to engage North, I think the things make sense for Chinese and Americans, but the problem is what's a more reliable path taking. I think the things has never been resolved in the past 20 years. Last point I want to share with you here is, realistically, if the peace park idea is a little bit, we say, idealistic, then is there any desirability of this concept could be enforced in the inter-Korean relations? Personally, as my answer is yes. I think such a concept is a big appealing to the North, showing a great sincerity of the Seoul in engaging the North. So then I hope, for example, compared to the Lee Min-ba administration, President Park's policy also brilliantly modified and getting unbelievably, I think, a little more relevant to the inter-Korean relations innovation. So then I hope Pyongyang could recognize it's a big, like incentive. It's not big incentive for the moment, but it's a very important political imperative for North to get out of some sort of a hardship. Particularly, you see after there are certain nuclear tests, China is getting tougher, and China is getting much stingy. If the North Korea would like to wobble through their hardship, they have to search for some sort of new alternative. So then Peace Park initiative, along with some sort of carrots, maybe will be some sort of attainable objective for the North. Because if they feel there's quite little space they can maneuver, so they probably also will desperate just to embrace some sort of the incentive. So then, at the end of the day, the question almost the same. Peace Park idea is great, but what kind of some sort of, with a sugar smeared, some sort of, the token, the Seoul also could just offer simultaneously. Then I think it is also probably just a go realistic. Let me stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Feng. He mentioned that how we can convince North Korea to agree to this project without offering the kind of economic incentives that South Korean government doesn't have any intention to give freely to North Korea. And pursuing this project can be also constrained by the political tensions. And since we are pursuing two goals, like trust building process between the Koreas, at the same time, the denuclearization. There must be a tension between two goals, and it can also constrain the pursuing this project. And he also mentioned that this project at this stage is somewhat looks idealistic. So how we can make this project realized, and we need more effort to make this project realized with other matters. And I'd like to ask Mr. Lee Gang-woo to answer some of the questions that he can answer at this stage. Maybe we have not finalized all the budget and the destination, the spot of the World Peace Park. So as far as you can prepare, please answer the questions for them.
예, 아주 많은 궁금증들이 이렇게.
Well, thank you very much for your great questions. Now, to some of the questions, indeed, to some of your comments, I see that a lot of you have mentioned that implement the more has to be added to make the plan more concrete. And now let me try to answer the questions raised. As Ambassador Everard has mentioned earlier on, regarding your question, the Peace Park initiative, in some sense, is, well, considering the current stance of North Korea, seems to be quite challenging and difficult indeed. But I would like to also add that changes can take place anytime. And we can see ample examples about those unexpected changes. As you're aware of, back in 2005, North and South Korea were connected with the railway through the DMZ. And before the project has actually started, there were a lot of skepticisms about the possibilities of those projects. But that actually became a reality. And that was a critical step to reactivate the inter-Korean interchanges. And that's one example. And I think we can find some analogies between that project and the Peace Park project as well. Even we do have the current situation, we should not be excessively optimistic, but I don't see any ground for being excessively pessimistic either. At least we need to develop various intensives to continue the contact with North Korea through various incentives, including this one. And another common question raised by our discussants were concentrated around the meaning of and the intention of the park. So let me elaborate on that front. Why do we need to collaborate together with the parties to armistice agreement? As you are aware of, this year marks the 60th year of the division of the Korean Peninsula and indeed armistice agreement. This is a very meaningful year for us. We made numerous efforts over the years, but we could not see substantial changes over the past 6 decades. So we came to the realization that we should not repeat our previous approaches. In other words, as we have not seen substantial progresses over the years based upon our previous approaches, we would like to attempt a new approach by engaging the international community over to our discourses. Because we have a long-term perspectives, we have a long-term vision, and we have the patience before we can see the reunification become a reality. And before that, we need to utilize various channels and exercise various efforts. And also, secondly, the North Korea has been quite unilateral in their approaches to and away from South Korea. This is one of the reasons as to why we could not see the successful outcomes of various proposals over the years. And so with the engagement of the international community for a project like this, I believe that this would be a better facilitator to push the North Korea to come to the global stage. And this is maybe our deep thinkings, based upon our deep thinkings over our past approaches. And also, as Dr. Narushige has mentioned earlier on about the size of the budget and duration of the construction, we do have a plan. We do have, however, a rough figure, ballpark figure at the moment. The ballpark at the moment is for the creation of the park. We're currently estimating about 250 billion Korean won as our budget, but this is quite still volatile or can be subject to change. Depending upon the added or subtracted details about the park. Before we can share with you concrete calculated figures, informed calculation about the size of the budget. But current rough ballpark is about 250 billion Korean won. We have this rough figure because sooner or later we need to send this proposal to North Korea to have further discussions. And so the fact that we have the rough ballpark figure is the reflection of our sincere commitment about the project. I believe that this would further convince North Korea and would also facilitate and the reciprocation of North Korea in terms of their sincerity towards the project. And now regarding the security questions as to whether there is a possibility that this would be used as a channel for defectors' passage as well as military aggression, and also Ambassador Everard also mentioned that what if the defectors would be using this channel, this as a channel for defection? Well, indeed, those similar questions around the military threat, security threat, and defector issues were discussed as well in our discussions. And so when we finally select the site and location, that decision would be based upon the military burdens and security burdens. So we will use a parity principle. In other words, the burden on each side from the military and security perspectives on North and South Korea would be same. And regarding the entry fee, rather, if North Korean defectors would use this as a channel to defect to South Korea, well, I think this can be managed through a thorough work plan and operational plan of the park. Of course, North and South Korea would be managing the park, but maybe a third-party monitoring committee or the United Nations or other policing functions can be done by a third party so that such possible cases can be prevented. If we are not quite clear about that possible concerns, then how can a peace park project like this can ever be realized? So those would be addressed through a concrete operational plan. Thank you very much. And also additionally, as Professor Snyder, Dr. Snyder has mentioned earlier on, there were similar proposals raised. And I think your question was about the Dmz Forum's discussion about the ecological park. But our proposal is not directly related with the ecological preservation. And this is also not a developmental project around the adjacent communities. And this is not an environmental development project either. This is purely a peace project. Of course, as a sideline, the peace park may be linked to the local autonomy's development or the fringe benefits or preservation of the ecological system around the DMZ. But the core motive is to make sure that this park is a peace project that will mediate the military and security concerns. And so the ecological preservation is not the sole focus of this project. Of course, the creation of the peace park will be conducted in a way that will minimize the ecological damage around the DMZ area. However, ecological preservation is not the sole and primary objectives of this park project. And so our current idea is that the park is not likely to be located across the band or would be constructed in a large scale, but rather a particular site, a specific site would be designated as a first step for the Peace Park project that would also minimize the environmental impact and would also address the security and military concerns if the park becomes too excessively oversized. And then that would indeed undermine the primary objectives of the DMZ. And so that's the threshold that we're not going to cross. So I would say that it would be rather a dot as opposed to be a belt. Now, regarding the armistice agreement, it would be a big framework for our project to be conducted. So armistice agreement would be an overarching framework of the park. And now regarding Professor Taylor's questions about the intention, and you also mentioned that too many chefs are on board, and you raised the concerns about that, and also what would be the incentives that can be offered to North Korea, as well as the methods of financing. Now, regarding the intention of the internationalizing the park, has been elaborated a couple of times earlier on. This starts from our retrospective view and thoughts about our past track. And so we would like to engage the international community in order not to repeat the previous failure to reach an achievement. And we have the firm belief that this is the most workable and the most likely to be a success if we internationalize the park project. Now, regarding the incentive packages towards North Korea, well, we have thought about it, but I don't think it's the appropriate occasion for me to share the details at the moment. And regarding the incentives, I think it's also based upon the exchanges or give and take approaches. So we're indeed thinking about various intensives, but I hope that there will be another opportunity for me to give you more details about the incentives after the negotiations or discussions are taking place. So I would like to ask for your understanding about not being able to share with you the details. Also, regarding the trust building process,
so far, the inter-Korean relationship, we focused on the economic cooperation to encourage the change within the North Korea. But as you know, that it has ended up with only the limited outcome, and it fails to build more fundamental trust between the two Koreas. So that has been the learning and reflection on our past engagement. And Peace Park, it's rather a soft issue, but we are building this park in a demilitarized zone, meaning that it will touch upon the political and the military issues between the two Koreas, and in the process that we can build the fundamental trust between the two Koreas, and it is a visible project. So it will become a test bed as to how strong or weak the trust is between the two Koreas. So through this project, then we could make a financial and economic approach, but also the political and the military approach in terms of building a trust. So it is more of a fundamental approach, I believe. And Professor Chu from Peking University talked about various issues, the demilitarization, denuclearization, and the parallel approach of the trust building and denuclearization. Then it might put this project into peril. And I do agree that we have a lot of obstacles to overcome before making it practical and implementable. And we have been seeking a lot of help from our international partners in solving each and every problems that we have come across in dealing with North Korea. And basically, the issue of North Korean nuclear situation, the issue has been raised, I believe, that about 2 decades ago. But on the basis, I think it's all related to the trust or the lack of trust between North Korea and the international community, so that the problem is yet to be resolved. On the other hand, it has been never aggravating on a daily basis. So this peace project, I think it is a project that can be made feasible, and we can start the first shovel next year. Of course, we will require a very strong determination and drive from the North Korean authorities. So I believe that if we could encourage strengthen the cooperation and the trust on the political and the military front surrounding this issue, then it might be conducive in terms of resolving the nuclear issue in North Korea.
As a moderator, I'd like to ask one last question. And maybe I'm too materialistic or realistic. You mentioned that this project will be funded from the South Korean money, like Inter-Korea Cooperation Fund. Then in what sense this will be an international project? So how can we make it very difficult for North Korea to shut it down unilaterally if they are not happy with South Korea for any matters?
그래서 그 핵심이 바로 이제
I think the key is
남한과 북한만 이렇게
to make it an international project, not just between the two Koreas. So that is why I have been repeating the importance of engaging the parties to the armistice agreement so that North Korea can be a consistent player with this project. In the United States and China and the United Nations were the parties that our government has seek support from, and understand that China has already contacted the North Korean authorities for joining this project. We believe that the parties to the armistice agreement should play a more active role in introducing more everlasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. And I believe that this is the vehicle that we use to encourage that kind of participation. I think during the process that the Korean authorities feel the need to participate in. Of course, on the flip side, then North Korea might feel it another different types of pressure being exercised by other parties, and they might go play rogue as they did before. But based upon our past experience, when we try to seek support from North Korea before we go to other parties, it ended up resulting in pretty much nothing. So this is why we are trying to encourage the participation of the international community to reduce the possibility of North Korea acting unpredictably.
And this ends the Korea Global Forum 2013, the Seoul conference. And as a project chair of the Korea Global Forum 2013, I truly want to appreciate all the participants today, especially those who stayed until at this moment. Thank you, and see you next year. Thank you.